So, good evening to all of you. What I'm going to talk about is what is the prospect of entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship is not only important in today's environment but also how digitization enables entrepreneurship. So the first thing that we need to appreciate is that while there are interesting statistics thrown in terms of number of employees, potential employees that get graduated every year, what we need to also appreciate is that the rate at which jobs are growing is far lower than the rate at which employees or potential employees are growing, and hence entrepreneurship is the only resort that we have. Entrepreneurship means that you need to own your own business. Also, the important thing is that I completely agree with Dr. Bala when he says that let us not write off the current generation as being ADHD or whatever else it is, because things have not changed for millennia, and every generation ought to be different from the older generation, and there is a word for that. The word is called evolution. We are all evolving, so let's admit it. And I'm sure none of you would be really wishing away all the technology which is available to you. So the point remains that how do you factor technology into leading a better life? And the life that I'm talking about is that of an entrepreneur. So the first submission that I have for all of you is that entrepreneurship is not only important because there are fewer jobs available for all of us, but also entrepreneurship is completely doable. Now, entrepreneurship, or a very parsimonious word for talking about entrepreneurship, would be self-employment. Self-employment can be taught, enabled right at the schooling level. I'm not talking about college here. Schooling. Because at the core of entrepreneurship, what you also need to appreciate is entrepreneurship is a mindset. Entrepreneurship requires you to conjure up ideas, it requires you to manage risk, and take these ideas to fruition by either making money or by making a social impact. And that's where I agree with GR when he talked about that patents is no indication of innovativeness. At best, patents indicate inventiveness. And lo and behold, of the 7 million patents which are granted by the US Patent and Trademark Office, no more than 0.2 have ever been commercialized. That's so much is the gap between invention and innovation. 99.8% of all the patents which have been granted, let alone filed, have never seen the light of the day. And that's the reason why perhaps Apple and Google don't figure in the list of the most patented firms across the world. Yet they are figuring right there when it comes to innovation. So let's not confuse innovation with invention or even R&D spending. Because for many, many years, the company which had the highest R&D spending in the world was GM, followed by Volkswagen. And you know what happened to GM and what's happened to Volkswagen. So once again, R&D is no indication of how innovative you are. At best, you can possibly be more inventive, and the proxies are filing more patents. Coming down to entrepreneurship. And now the brief which I got from Dr. Bala was that I'm supposed to talk about how SMAC is a mnemonic for social, mobility, analytics, and cloud computing. And these have been recent advents as recent as just about 10-15 years. And because of high performance computing, pervasive computing, and ever reducing process and the cost of computing, these things are right now available right in our pockets. So we don't want to go any further than that. Which means that how entrepreneurship can be made viable, entertaining, and impactful with the help of SMAC technologies. So imagine for a moment that entrepreneurship is like a funnel. Okay, so imagine instead of a PPT or a drawing board, so imagine a funnel. At the start or the top end of the funnel, which is broad, think of it as discovery. Which is very interesting that every innovation starts with a discovery. Every innovation starts with a discovery, where you are trying to discover a pain point of a customer. And pain point need not be anywhere farther away from you. It can be your own life experiences. So the first level is discovery. Once you discover what the pain point is, or where is the opportunity for you to make some money or to solve a problem, the next thing that you do is ideation. You ideate. You come up with ideas. And being a researcher myself for quite some time now, one of the very fundamental practices when it comes to ideation is that when you're generating ideas, quantity is more important than quality. I'll repeat myself. Quantity of ideas is always more important than quality of ideas. Because the best ideas come from more ideas. The thing that we often mistake about the Western hemisphere, and especially if we talk about the books that the Western authors write or the movies that the Western directors make, is that we just see the crest of the best movies or the best books that hit Indian market. But behind those best books, there are so many other books which these people have written which never hit Indian market. Right? Even the work of Einstein or that of some of the greatest philosophers, researchers, and academics, we often forget so much of what has never hit the market. Which means the best way to do best is to do more of it, which is ideation. The third element is experimentation. Now there was very interesting research conducted where somebody tried to understand that why Google became so successful vis-a-vis Yahoo. If you trace back the history of Google and Yahoo, they come from the same university, which is Stanford University. In fact, it comes from the same set of students studying electrical engineering at the Stanford University, separated by just 2 years, 1997 and 1999. But how come Google became such a phenomenal success, whereas Yahoo was waiting for a buyout? Is it that Google paid better salaries than Yahoo? Is it Google employed better engineers than Yahoo? And at one point in time, Yahoo was a better brand than Google. Right? Way back in 2005, Yahoo was a better brand than Google. So it was the same university, same place, which is Silicon Valley, same set of buddies from Stanford University. So everything seems to be same. But why did the fate of these two organizations fork out? And the finding of this interesting paper is that Google became phenomenally more successful than Yahoo is because Google did twice as many experiments as Yahoo did. That's it. So it's often not about the kind of talent which you have or the kind of funding which you have. It's mostly about how many experiments you are able to do, because experimentation is perhaps the best way to learn something fast. And that's one reason why, at least for me, I used to enjoy going to the physics lab and the chemistry lab than sitting through the theory classes. Though in a lab I was dealing with H2SO4, which would as well burn my shirt, but I enjoyed playing with H2SO4 than writing the equation down in a room. That's about the lab. So discovery, ideation, experimentation, and the last thing is execution or commercialization. And that's where the difference between innovation and invention comes. Invention, when commercialized, becomes innovation. But the important point that all of you need to behold is that when we talk about innovation, it need not be your own idea. Many a times, the ideas can come from very much outside you. For example, if you talk of the digital photography, the whole notion of digital photography was created way back in 1972 by Eastman Kodak. Think of that for a moment. But in 1972, Kodak and Eastman Kodak himself was so much in love with celluloid photography that his entire attention and the so-called core competence of the firm was to convert a 34 clicks roll into a 36 click roll. Make an all-day roll to a day and night roll. And they drew so much of pleasure and pride from doing so that they missed out the entire board. They thought of digital photography as a distraction. And as a result, they sold the entire business to a less-known company called Sony. And rest is history. Same was the case with the world's first MP3 player. Sony was right there in the front when it came to MP3 entertainment, but Sony had this internal conflict that if they sell MP3 players, people download music online for free, how do Sony Pictures, which has a royalty business, make more money? So they stopped the project just for Steve Jobs to take it up. Or the AdSense, which is the core engine of Google, was developed by Microsoft. Touchscreen, which Apple thrives on, was developed by HP. HP was so fearful that if I sell touchscreens, who will buy my laptops? They stopped the whole thing. And hence, ideas did not come from you. Ideas can come from anywhere. Marks always goes to the people who commercialize them. And another misunderstanding that we have about innovation is the so-called first mover's advantage. We often think that if you're first in the market, you will continue to lead the market. While you can argue that it's the early bird that takes the prey, but also you need to understand that it is always second mouse that gets the cheese. Right? What happens to the first mouse? It dies. So when we are dealing with uncertainty, when we're dealing with technology evolution, it is better off that you take a step back, allow the pioneers to do the experiments, burn the fingers in the process, and then go second. And Samsung is an amazing example of that. It's a stated philosophy in Samsung that we want to be the fast follower and never the pioneer. In fact, if you read the book of Walter Isaacson, who wrote this very legendary book called Steve Jobs, which is a biography of Steve Jobs, he talks about that even Apple had this explicit philosophy of being the second. But the speed and the associated brand might that Apple could bring in to launch the product was phenomenal. So coming back to this funnel, which is discovery, ideation, experimentation, execution, let me spend the next 5 minutes talking about how digitization impact innovation and hence entrepreneurship, and how the generation, which I think is mostly missing in the audience, and that's where I'm placing my bet on, the digital natives. Digital natives means people who did not migrate into digital era, but they were born in the digital era, which is missing right here. How they are better off than some of the old Marwadis and the Parsis and the Gujarati entrepreneurs that we have seen in India. Let's talk about the first thing, which is discovery. Now, instead of me going all the way out and looking at market research and market survey and filling those forms out, wouldn't it be interesting enough for me to have an ear or a probe into social media conversations? If only I can put a probe into Facebook silently and try and understand what kind of discussions are happening in the Facebook, I can possibly come up with pain points that customers have. Because even if you look at taxi services, for example, Uber was not the first radio service. There are so many radio taxis available in Bangalore, at least where I come from. Easy Cab, Meru, and Taxi for sure, there are a couple of them. But the thing that Uber and Ola brought in is your ability to trace the vacant taxi nearest to you and having a predictability of how much time it would take for me to get the next taxi. And that's it. It's a different thing altogether that Uber has 3,000 employees across the world and Ola has 3,500 employees in India. So much is the power of technology. And I'll come to that shortly, that how technology can replace humans, allowing them to do more sophisticated work, and that's another way of evolution. So social media can allow you to discover latent needs of the customer. Please understand, and as Clayton Christensen often talks about, is that it is highly impossible that a customer would come to you sharing her pain points. Because when you go to a doctor, what do you go to a doctor with? Problems or symptoms? Symptoms, right? Do you know it's bacterial or viral? So if it's your own body, and you do not know whether the problem is bacterial, viral, or something third, how do you expect a customer to know what the problems are? What she'll tell you are the symptoms. But as an intelligent entrepreneur, you have to convert those symptoms into problems. And then find a solution to the problem. So that's the element of social. In this map, social comes in discovery. Second element is ideation. Now, one of the myths that we have is how firms build a culture of innovation or creativity within. And as a consequence, what they end up doing is they end up doing all sorts of interventions, including flexible working hours, and so many cafeterias, flexible dress code, etc., etc. But what they often forget, and you would also appreciate that shortly, is that some of the best ideas that we get are not at the workplace. Some of the best ideas that I get, for example, is when I'm driving from my workplace to my home, or to my workplace, or taking a stroll in the morning, or in the evening, or under the shower. These are the moments in the day when I'm getting the best ideas. So think of it for a moment, that when I'm driving from my office to my home, and I get an idea, what do we do with an idea then? An idea has a short shelf life. I can't hold an idea for too long. So what happens? What if I can just take my mobile phone out, and the way I text in SMS, I can just punch in an idea into a system of my company where these ideas can get decided. And that's where mobility is a great tool for ideation. There is enough and more research which throws evidence that brainstorming, which we have assumed as the de facto way of idea generation, is far less efficient than any other way of creativity. I'll repeat myself. Brainstorming, which was advocated by this gentleman called Alex Hobsbawm in 1945, just after World War II, has never ever shown to have better quality and quantity of ideas than any other technique. Yet, everybody uses brainstorming. It's a fad. What happens is that brainstorming blocks your ideas because while somebody is talking of an idea, you have to hold your idea in your mind. Brainstorming leads to what we call as groupthink, because you can't disagree. And third thing brainstorming also brings in is a free-riding behavior. Many people free ride on others' ideas and they don't contribute their own ideas. So what if people were given an application just like Facebook, because everyone seems to be hooked on Facebook, where I put a challenge out there that help me solve the waste problem in your office just after the cafeteria is done, and how do you reduce the wastage? can you give me 10 ideas over the next one day? And the person who gets the best idea gets a chance to implement the idea and gets rewarded. That's where mobility allows you to generate better and more ideas. More leads to better, I know. The third thing is experimentation. The difference, as I told, between Google and Yahoo was Google did twice as many experiments as Yahoo did. The challenge that happens to all of us in India primarily is because in our mind and in our behavior, knowledge and skills are two separate compartments. And this goes back to our Brahmical society, the division of caste and subsequently the division of labor. The Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Shudras and the Vyasyas. The Brahmins are supposed to be the beholders of knowledge. Kshatriyas are supposed to be protecting the entire society, and if there is no war, they're idling out. Vyasyas are the people who are supposed to exchange money, and which Brahmins never liked because they thought money is evil, though they might be super rich in the process. And then anything which is not interesting enough gets relegated to the last category. Which means in our mind, the people who had knowledge never want to roll their sleeves and get their hands dirty, and the people who got their hands dirty never bother to get the knowledge. And that is exactly where the American system challenged us. Americans and most of the Western Hemisphere, and you'll be surprised to know that in Germany, for example, there are still so many households that have a lathe at a home. Mind it. People having lathe at their house. There are so many households where people build their own house using power tools. Now, how many times, many of engineers, including me, how many times have we rolled our sleeves and repaired a fuse or an MCB that got tripped? We don't mind calling a help for $100 and getting it repaired. Which means that unless and until knowledge fuses with skill, you can't experiment. Americans, Germans, and to a large extent even Japanese, for instance, and Israeli, for example, they're highly successful in entrepreneurship and innovation because they don't mind applying their knowledge into practice. Whereas we have always looked into helping someone else or assisting someone else do the job. And that is one reason why IT industry thrived in South India. IT industry thrived in South India because IT industry requires abstract thinking. It's a different question altogether that I come from the industry myself, having spent close to 7 years in Wipro. One thing that straight out comes is that at any level in the Indian IT services industry, at any level, they are supposed to be told what the problem is, and then they can solve the problem. But till the time nobody is told what the problem is, we are incapable of solving the problem because someone has to tell the problem. And just to give you perspective, on the size of Indian IT industry, Indian IT services industry exports is $103 billion. That's it. And the total IT service industry is $140 billion, whereas our GDP is $1.7 trillion. IBM, on the other hand, is $105 billion. The company which is IBM, which is close to 105-year-old company now, roughly, is bigger than the Indian IT service industry. The entire Indian IT service industry is smaller than one company called IBM. Now, you can say that, of course, we can compare these two companies, but the point is that perhaps we should. Perhaps we should try and understand that where is entrepreneurship happening. So, mobility, social. Let's talk about cloud computing. And cloud computing comes handy again in experimentation. Today, if I have to write a code, all I need to go is to book a processing capacity, a storage, and a bandwidth in the world's largest cloud service provider, which is Amazon. Now, this might surprise to many of you that Amazon, which is allegedly a book-selling company, is the largest cloud service provider in the world. And I can do that in a jiffy. In less than 2 minutes, I can get a secure environment where I can write my code, have a production environment ready, do the quick and dirty experiments without buying a server, without buying a line, and without buying processing power. Or even without having a very good processor at my home. I can use a dumb terminal. And that is how cloud computing reduces your cost of performing an experiment. I can share my experiment results. I made a very simple application. I can put an Android application on the cloud or the Android space. I can ask my friends to download the application, see how things work, and they can say it works or not. It was never the case before. And the last thing is commercialization. And this takes me back to this very interesting case of Swiggy in Bangalore. Now, Swiggy is a Bangalore-based company that does home delivery of food, was a very late entrant into this industry. The first player that came in was Tiny Owl. Tiny Owl made a very beautiful application connecting several kitchens in the city of Bangalore to the people who are reasonably hungry but don't know how to cook, have disposable income, and they connected. Swiggy came 2 years after Tiny Owl. But Swiggy found a very interesting gap in the Tiny Owl's business model. And the gap was, while Tiny Owl had a great application, it's a double-sided market. Kitchens pay money to put themselves on this list, and people pay money to get the food. But the challenge was logistics in the nightmarish traffic of Bangalore. Swiggy came with the simple idea, why don't I have my own fleet of drivers wearing the t-shirt of Swiggy, and Swiggy has displaced Tiny Owl. It came 2 years later, but has displaced the early entrant and perhaps a market leader. And that is where where you have applications, where social, cloud, analytics, and mobility can come handy in not only for you to discover the problems, generate ideas, experiment, quick, dirty, fast, and finally commercialize your concepts. And I think we are right now at the cusp of the best time for us to do entrepreneurship, because the cost of being an entrepreneur could have never ever been so low thanks to technology. So I think the digital natives have a great future, not to look for securing jobs in Wipro, Infosys, and IBM, because frankly speaking, and that's a tongue-in-cheek statement, frankly speaking, they might be wasting themselves in such companies. They should better do something on their own, using all the technologies available to them, and be entrepreneurs. So that's my submission. Thank you very much.